The allegory of the lion, hyena, and the gazelle illustrates the effects of the peacekeeping law, also known as the law of limited competition, on an ecological community. The peacekeeping law states that you can compete with other organisms but not wage war, such as outright killing them, destroying their food, or denying them access to their food. In the allegory, we examine the role of hyenas that are exempted from this rule. Hyenas and lions compete for a common food source, gazelles. But the hyenas are no longer required to merely compete with the lions. The hyenas can do virtually anything in their power to defeat the lions. The narrator deduces that the hyenas would be the first to exterminate all the lions, increasing the amount of gazelle for themselves. The hyena population grows and then needs more food. So then the hyenas kill off the competitors of the gazelle, leading the gazelle population to grow, and in effect, the hyena population as well. Now the hyena needs to kill the competitors of the gazelle's food source, plants that compete with the grasses for space and sunlight. Once again, the gazelle population increases, along with the hyena population, and in the process, the diversity in all levels of the community, the primary producers, herbivores, carnivores, is destroyed. The allegory as a whole represents the nature of the taker culture. Takers have decided themselves exempt of the peacekeeping law and wage war on all that inhibit their growth. The hyenas represent the takers, being unrestricted in their actions to achieve unlimited expansion. The lion represents the competitors of the takers, who follow the peacekeeping law, and the gazelles are the resources the takers need for expansion. The symbolism contributes to the mosaic of how things came to be this way by establishing the nature of taker culture and what separated it from the rest. The allegory illustrates the fundamental concept for taker culture as one that is allowed to use whatever means to achieve its ultimate goal, growth, which then sets the stage for the concept that takers originated from the agricultural revolution, the vehicle that allowed them to attain unparalleled growth. The allegory further elaborates on a fundamental belief of taker culture, that the world was made for man and thus is not subject to its laws, such as the one of limited competition, which is shown when the hyena decides not to follow such laws. Finally, the allegory of the lion, hyena, and the gazelle illuminates the ultimately destructive nature of the taker culture, as shown in the annihilation of diversity in the community, the result of the growth the hyena seeks. This can be compared to the destruction of the forests for agriculture and commerce. All of these points contribute to the mosaic of how things came to be this way.
Ishmael's goal in taking on students is that he guides them to attaining virtue. But what is virtue? Virtue is made of three components: knowledge, will, and wisdom. Knowledge simply means to know something, whether it be true or not. Will is broken down into multiple parts, but it begins with being willing to discover which knowledge is true and which is illusion. After knowing the truth, another will is required to give knowledge of the truth to someone else. These two wills and true knowledge form wisdom. A third will to have a life of sharing true knowledge with others is needed to form virtue. Ishmael is virtuous in this story, as he has learned to detach himself from the illusions of mother culture, who spreads false knowledge, and has dedicated his life to helping others to do the same. To do this, he uses allegory and discussion to help the narrator question himself. The story of the lion, the gazelle, and hyena is one such story. We see will and knowledge developing in the narrator. However, this allegory is not enough to bring him wisdom. Ishmael's teaching style is dialectic, meaning he asks questions to guide his student. In answering the questions with occasional interjections from his teacher, the student, in this case the narrator, almost teaches himself. By going along with this teaching style, in which the narrator must be heavily involved in his own learning, the narrator shows that he has the will to discover the truth. His will bears fruit, and we see him develop knowledge of the peacekeeping laws and their purpose, but also in his observation that mother culture, who taught him that takers are killing the planet because of a blunder, and that has been lying to them. This mother culture fails to mention that it is a result of them cheating against the laws that has brought disaster upon the earth. He notes that what the hyena does, killing of other life until nothing remains, is considered almost holy work by farmers and ranchers. When he points this out, he shows that he has obtained knowledge that is true. The takers killing the world is not because they are executing their method wrong, but because they are waging war, and the outcome is exactly what happens when the rules are broken. This story, however, is not enough to give wisdom or proper virtue to the narrator. He has the knowledge of what is true, but he does not show the will to teach others. He continues to learn with Ishmael and expand his own knowledge, but does not guide others. He is on the path to virtue, however, and with each allegory comes closer to that final goal.
Although Ishmael is mainly using a Socratic dialogue to educate the narrator, Ishmael incorporates elements of rhetoric to better persuade his argument. Rhetoric is a form of persuasion through the Greek terms of pathos, logos, and ethos. Pathos is persuasion through emotion, logos is persuasion through logic, and ethos is persuasion through the credibility of the speaker. Ishmael uses pathos for both the takers and leavers in the allegory. He uses the pathos of the takers when talking about how the hyenas would kill the gazelle for food, but would ultimately be driven off by the lion before it could eat it. The reader feels bad for the hyenas who would get his kill but would not be able to eat the food because of the lion. The hyenas wiping out the population of lions would be one solution in terms of this kind of pathos. Ishmael uses pathos for the leavers when talking about how, without diversity, the ecosystem would be fragile. Ishmael said, "Diversity is a survival factor for the community itself. A community with 100 million species can survive almost anything short of global catastrophe. The hyenas killing off their competitor and then their first and even second removed shows that the hyenas are damaging the diversity of the ecosystem, which in turn can wipe out all of life in a catastrophe." Ishmael uses the pathos of both the leavers and the takers to show both sides, ultimately showing that the leaver side is a stronger argument. Either you're benefiting yourself for the short term, but inevitably leading to the death of all life, or you could benefit yourself and all others in the long term by living in a diverse world that will last. The hyenas show logos in their response to running out of competitors. When their population grew too large, they once again needed more food. While we've already established that their motives were twisted, the hyenas now needed to find a new way to sustain themselves and continue to prioritize their growth over diversity. When they began killing the competition of their prey so that the populations of their food rose, in their minds their actions were illogical. To save their starving population, it makes sense to increase the amount of food that they eat. Ishmael argues that they had another, more sensible alternative and also uses pathos to support it. He refers to what he calls the ABCs of ecology, where increasing the food supply leads to larger populations. Larger populations drop the food supply, which in turn drops the population back down. Ishmael argues that this balance keeps diversity, the end goal of any community, intact. He says that it is logical for the hyenas to let starvation drop their population back down to levels so that they can become a more sustainable population and not destroy the larger community of life. There is very little ethos used in this allegory. Ishmael uses the work of Peter Farb, a notable author and anthropologist, to support his claims on how populations grew, but also uses it as pathos and logos, which make for much stronger arguments.
The hyena allegory is important to the story of Ishmael, but it also relates to contemporary environmental issues as well. The farming industry is the most glaring example of humans being like the hyena. The use of pesticides, herbicides, and other artificial farming techniques diminish the competitors that compete with and consume the crop, whether it be wheat, grass, or even sod. Weeds and insects meet a similar fate to the lion in that they are purposely eradicated. This does not bode well for the future of the earth and the sustainability of man, because this system is fragile and subject to mass famine, which can destroy civilizations. Biodiversity is the hedge against this outcome and ensures nature's future. If the takers continue with the system, however, the crops are more susceptible to failure and the surrounding ecosystem is exposed. An example closer to home is seen on a daily basis, it seems like. In Montgomery, deer run rampant around our suburban community. In the ecosystem, wolves are the main natural predator of deer in the Northeast, but since humans had conquered the land, wolves and other predators have all but disappeared. Humans took their habitats, but more importantly also started to kill animals that hunt deer. Wolves compete with humans for food, and can get onto farms and consume the food that was originally designated for humans. Humans, being like the hyenas, exterminate the wolves and other predators, a move which throws the equilibrium of the ecosystem out of whack. The deer population is left virtually unchecked, and so it grows, leading to its high population today. If humans decided to abide by the laws of nature so that they only compete but not wage war. Many environmental problems could be addressed or even avoided completely. However, humans rarely consider the consequences of their actions outside of themselves, and so these problems will continue until there is a major change in opinion. There are examples of humans trying not to be like the hyenas, such as organic farming and leaving other animals alone, but this is not enough to overcome the negative impacts of our society. We may not see our impacts as harmful, but nevertheless we are a detriment to the environment. Ishmael warned us of ourselves, but now a question remains. In order to preserve the world, can we honestly change the way we live?